The program for instructional effectiveness offers a variety of professional development opportunities, including workshops, lectures, and book discussion groups. So I'd like to welcome Anna Grinath, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Sciences, where her teaching and research are focused on biology education in post-secondary contexts. She holds a PhD in curriculum and instruction in science education and an MS in biological sciences from Florida State University, and a BA in biological science from Middlebury College. Prior to coming to ISU, she was an assistant professor at Middle Tennessee State University. In 2022, Anna was a recipient of ISU's annual Outstanding Teaching Award. So please help me welcome Anna, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Margaret, and thank you to everyone for coming to the Great Ideas in Teaching event this morning. When Margaret asked me if I could present one of the sessions on great ideas in teaching, I spent some time thinking about what great ideas I use in my classroom and reflecting on what made it a great idea, in my opinion. And so I landed on one of the first tools I learned about when I was a graduate student in biology, attending workshops to improve my effectiveness as a laboratory teaching assistant. And so this first tool is the discussion map. And I think that what makes the discussion map so great and a great idea in teaching is that it was something I could easily implement as a relatively new teacher. And it is also something I still use now, 12 years later. So it's one of the first strategies I share when I mentor new teachers, and it's something I continually come back to when I'm dissatisfied with my teaching practice. So the discussion map is a great idea that can be used by teachers at all levels of experience, and that continues to be useful because how it is used and implemented can evolve with teaching and as we gain experience in the classroom, and then also can be adapted to different specific discussion goals. And so to be clear, what I'm going to share today, the discussion maps and talk moves, they're not my ideas. They are great ideas from education research and practitioner literature and foundations in teacher preparation literature. So my goals for this morning are to introduce these ideas of talk moves and discussion maps as pedagogical tools to foster productive talk. I'll of course explain what I mean when I say productive talk and its role in learning. And then I hope I can share some tips for implementing these pedagogical tools and then leave time for discussion amongst the group today. And so again, thank you for being here this morning, and I hope you'll find something useful and some takeaways in what I share today. And I look forward to learning from you and drawing on your expertise and experience in fostering productive talk in your classrooms during the discussion portion. Okay. So just again, as I'm going to introduce the ideas of discussion maps and talk moves, these are not my ideas, and these are great ideas from some of these books that I draw on all the time. And so I wanted to put them up here just so people, I'll kind of put the references in when I'm drawing on ideas from these different sources. But I just wanted to show kind of a diversity of the things that I'm drawing on here, some that are related specifically to science teaching, but I know that we want to be thinking about how these tools are applicable across all disciplines and many contexts. And so another one that I draw on quite a bit is this book, Socializing Intelligence Through Academic Talk and Dialogue. Okay, so first I said I was going to introduce a bit about what I mean when I say productive talk. And so when we have a goal for productive talk in our classroom, not all talk is necessarily productive. And so what do I mean when I say productive talk? Well, some of the key hallmarks of productive talk are that individual students are sharing, expanding, and clarifying their own thoughts. So that's what's happening through the talk. In productive talk, the goals are for students to be listening carefully to one another, students to deepen their reasoning, and then this is talk that encourages students to engage with others' reasoning. And so some of the other features of productive talk that help these hallmarks come out are that for productive talk, we tend to focus on key content and that the goals of that talk are focused on conceptual understanding. It's also important to be thinking about the ideas that come out in that talk, the students' ideas and experiences, that we think of those as resources for learning. So valuing the contributions that students bring into this talk, because there are resources that we can all learn from and use to expand and clarify our own thoughts. Other key important things are that everybody during these moments of talk, or hopefully extended moments of talk, that everyone can hear and understand what's being said. Thus, everyone is part of the conversation and everyone feels like they have a stake in the conversation. And as the instructors and teachers in the classroom, our role is to guide students to practice new ways of talking, reasoning, and collaborating with each other. So those are all features kind of wrapped up in this idea of what productive talk is and how we recognize productive talk in classrooms and how we can aim to foster productive talk in classrooms. And so I just want to spend another couple minutes highlighting why I think this is a goal that we might want to have in the classroom. And so why would we aim to foster productive talk? Well, in a short few words, I think this really encapsulates one of the reasons for me is because I really hold tightly to this idea that talk is an essential feature of building the mind. Talk builds the mind. So classroom talk shapes opportunities to think and reason and learn. And while this really resonates with me, it's also supported by solid research evidence that productive talk is critical for learning. And part of this is because as we talk about our ideas, that's making our thinking visible to both us, it's making thinking visible to our students, and then it's making our thinking visible to everybody involved in the conversation. And so productive talk supports reasoning and deepens students' understanding of complex material. Research shows that students learn more when they're doing the heavy lifting, that engaging in these forms of talk boosts memory, makes connections and associations, supports disciplinary language development, and also gives us all practice in justifying our ideas and taking risks. And so a lot of productive talk, what's happening is that it gives us a chance to kind of try out ideas before they're fully formed. And in the literature, this is often called as productive beginnings. And so again, it's recognizing that the ideas we bring into our classrooms and the ideas our students bring into our classrooms, while they might still be developing and becoming more solid and still making connections, those productive beginnings are really essential as a foundation for learning. And so we should elicit and recognize those productive beginnings and then provide opportunities through productive talk to work on those ideas. And so as we engage in productive talk, others can hear and think with us. And it also tends to promote a classroom culture that values effort over ability. And so at the same time, much of the talk in classrooms is not falling into this category of productive talk. So across most classrooms, at all levels of teaching and all disciplines, extended turns of talk can be rare in most classrooms. And so studies of classrooms at all academic levels highlight that most classroom discussion tends to look more like a recitation and tends to follow a pretty familiar pattern of initiation, response, evaluation, which sometimes people shorten to the IRE or call triadic dialogue. And so this pattern, this more recitation pattern of dialogue, tends to follow the pattern where the teacher asks a question that tends to have one right answer, calls on a student to respond, then indicates whether that answer is correct, and then moves on to another question. And this pattern of dialogue is useful and helpful and does reach specific goals. And so this is helpful for review. It's helpful for practicing retrieval. However, if the goal is productive talk, this particular pattern of talk does fail to create a culture where students are kind of taking each other's ideas seriously, taking risks, and building complex arguments together. And we have to be aware that this pattern of talk can also place a stigma around suggesting a wrong answer and signals that the goal of classroom talk is to get the right answer, which can then conflict with the important role that wrong answers play in academic discourse and advancing knowledge. Again, if we think back to that idea of kind of celebrating our productive beginnings and using talk as a way to work through our thinking, this pattern of initiation, response, evaluation doesn't really leave room for that. But this pattern of classroom talk as recitation is really common because facilitating, well, not because, often because it's the goal that we're trying to reach and it's good at reaching that goal in that moment. But also, I don't know if other people resonate with this, but I definitely do. I've definitely felt how facilitating productive talk is really hard. And it's really hard for both new and experienced teachers. And so I keep returning to this, even though I've been trying to draw on these specific tools I'm going to share today for many years, I often try to facilitate productive talk in my classroom and then come away dissatisfied and need to kind of go back to my checklist of, okay, what aspect am I dissatisfied with, and how can I draw on these tools to try to improve in the future? And so that's why I wanted to share these tools today with this group. And so there are some tips that we can draw on of what makes productive talk possible. And I've listed several here, but I'm only going to highlight kind of the end ones in our time together this morning. So first, things that make productive talk possible is, one, we need to have a belief that our students can engage in productive talk. And so a belief that students can do it and that it's a worthwhile goal to have. So a belief that talk is indeed a tool for learning. Also, thinking carefully about the community norms for classroom talk that we can work to set up from the beginning of the semester and hold throughout the semester. And so, for example, classroom norms such as an expectation that we are going to listen to each other, respond respectfully to each other, and take each other's ideas seriously and value them as playing a role in our own learning. And that ideas, not individuals, might be challenged during those discussions, but it's, again, the ideas, because we're working on our ideas together through talk. That we're all going to speak loudly so everybody can hear and be a part of the conversation, and that it's responsibility on each member of our classroom community to think if they're understanding and can hear, and ask for clarification if they can't hear or don't understand where the discussion is going. And then also important is, as the instructor, having a deep content understanding, because I think that's really how we're able to recognize those productive beginnings when they're shared in our classrooms. And then the things that we're gonna spend most of our time on today, where really key is planning out an open framing question to start off a discussion for productive talk, and then also planning a few follow-ups. And this is where the discussion map is a great tool. Having a clear academic purpose for the discussion, which I'll explain more about, and then drawing on a repertoire of varied talk moves to help us reach different goals, which I'll share more about. And so I wanted to frame this in terms of kind of two key challenges that I've experienced in the classroom, and then how I've drawn on these tools to help address those. So the first challenge that I resonate with is that when I plan that open framing question, I'm excited to hear what students say, but it is really hard to anticipate what students will say. And so that even with lots of experience, but also when I was a newer instructor, that was really kind of scary to think, okay, I'm going to ask this question and it's hard to anticipate what students are going to say. And then I've done this great work of eliciting those ideas, but what do I do with those ideas? How do I respond in a way that values and appreciates the ideas that students have just shared and put out to the group? And so that's the first challenge I want us to dig into a little bit. And so what helps me kind of feel confident and ready to take on this challenge of posing those open framing questions and hoping that I then facilitate productive talk with the ideas that are shared is the discussion map. And so what I've put here on this slide is just a general discussion map where 1, 3, and 5 are the things I would do as the instructor. So I'm planning to start with that open framing question. And then number 2, a student responds, maybe multiple student responds. And then again, this is where it helps me feel less nervous in these moments, is knowing that kind of no matter what idea is shared, what my follow-up question can always be is providing an opportunity for students to elaborate a bit on that idea that they've put forward. So typically I'm always ready to say, oh, can you say more about that? Or if they mention an idea that I specifically would like to hear them say, I might say, oh, what do you mean when you say this? And so I can be ready to know that that's how I'm going to respond to that first idea offered, and that's likely going to be a really productive way to respond, where I'm attending to the idea students put out and also providing an opportunity for them to elaborate a bit on their thinking. Because again, if we come back to that idea that talk is a tool for thinking and learning, and often we're forming our ideas as we talk, providing a student with an opportunity to extend on what they just said is an important opportunity for them to continue clarifying the things that they're thinking about and wanting to share with the class. And so when I do that follow-up, can you say more about that? The student hopefully says more about that. And then I'm always ready to then try to open it up to discuss that idea more and say, oh, does anyone want to respond to that idea? Or was anybody thinking about something similar? And then have them share their ideas about that. Or was anybody thinking about something different? And so we're continuing to attend to this idea as opposed to putting an idea out into conversation space and then just kind of leaving it there. And so that's the general discussion map. And I often keep these in my mind. I'll often write them down and have them on an index card in my back pocket. And it's what many people refer to as back pocket questions, so that in the moment, and especially at the start of the semester, I'm always nervous at the start of the semester as I'm getting to know my students and we're building our classroom community. And so knowing that I've got these back pocket questions and that I'm ready to facilitate, hopefully, starting to set the norms for productive talk in my classroom is really comforting to me. And so that's the tool that I learned early on as a graduate student that I found so useful and that I continue to find useful and use today. But this general discussion map has kind of one major assumption with it, that when I ask these questions and use these follow-ups, I'm going to get these student responses that I have here. But many of us, this might also resonate with us as well. That we ask our question and then we hear crickets, or we don't hear crickets, but we hear crickets. So there's an assumption that students are going to respond. And so that general discussion map I find useful, but that I also over the years have kind of built in my own reminders to it, because I know that I need to do even more to support students in feeling like they're ready to share their ideas and take those risks. So now with my general discussion map, I kind of also put in reminders to myself that I can't just start with this open framing question and expect that productive talk is going to burst forward. I need to also be really intentional about structuring time for my students to think and write about that question. Also, often important is providing them time to then share with people around them. And again, start trying out those ideas in a smaller group setting. Especially I teach classes that range from 5 students to 200 students. And so there's definitely varied degrees of risk-taking in putting ideas forward in those different settings. And so providing time for my students to think and write about that open framing question, and providing time for them to try those ideas out with people around them and kind of get some confidence that their ideas are going to be taken seriously and valued by our classroom community have been really important things for me to remind myself to do. And then when a student does respond, I also remind myself to really listen to what they are saying, because what I found is that often I try to anticipate what students might say, and sometimes that can keep me from really hearing what they're saying. And I might make assumptions about what I'm hearing without kind of checking myself to see, is that really what they're saying, or am I making an assumption about what they're saying? So I remind myself to really listen to what is said. And then along with that, asking my follow-up questions of, can you say more about that, does also help me make sure I'm listening to what they're saying and that their peers in the classroom are also really listening. Again, remind myself to allow for wait time after asking, can you say more about that? Because if we're thinking while we're talking, that requires time for us to form our thoughts and decide what we want to say. And often, to help myself remember to provide that wait time, I'll actually count to 5 or 8 or 10 in my head as well, and say, don't expect anybody to say anything until after I've finished counting, to help remind myself that even as the instructor, sometimes it seems like I'm waiting a long time, but it's really only been about half a second. And then the student responds again, and I want to remind myself to listen to what's been said. Okay, and so then as I've been using this tool, I also got really interested, and as I've been, I guess, supporting other new teachers, new teaching assistants to think about using this as a productive tool for productive talk, I got really interested in like, okay, well, can we really depend on this? Like, I find this useful, but if I'm sharing this as a tool with others, is there, what kind of evidence can I also share that if you plan this open framing question and you plan some follow-ups, that you can feel confident that you're gonna be well on your way to supporting productive talk. And so that led me into one of the areas of research that I get really excited about. I love studying conversations and interactions in the classroom to really understand what is going on and to try to improve and develop tools to support productive talk in the classroom. And so what I wanted to share with you today was the idea of, okay, if I do these 3 things of this discussion map, how confident can I feel that what I elicit from students is leading us towards productive talk? And so I think about this in terms of what's called an adjacency pair, where I ask a question and then a student responds, and those 2 pieces create a pair, and it's referred to as an adjacency pair. And so if we look at our discussion map, that initial opening question that I ask is the first part of that pair, and the student response would be the second. And then the next part of the discussion map is another adjacency pair. And so with some colleagues, we looked across 18 different discussions, which within them had 283 adjacency pairs to ask. If we ask these kinds of questions, what are we going to elicit from students? And so we looked at the questions in terms of, is this an open question? Because that's the goal of the discussion map and what's suggested for productive talk, where an open question is one that sparks multiple positions and perspectives or solution paths. And that's in contrast to a closed question, where we're asking a question that there's a single right answer that we're wondering if students can share with us. And then on the other side, student responses, we can think about those across 3 categories as well, where you might get a student response that's more of a brief term or a fact. Or in productive talk, our goal is for more extended responses. And so that might be extended observations that students are bringing in from their experiences and prior knowledge, or extended ideas of how or why something is happening. And so we were interested in, if we asked open questions or closed questions, and these different conversations we were looking at were actually with teaching assistants, so relatively new instructors in the classroom. These were undergraduate teaching assistants in a biology laboratory. And so we looked at, okay, if open questions or closed questions are asked, what's the frequency that what's elicited from students are responses that are brief terms? How frequently do these 2 different types of questions elicit observations? And how frequently do these different types of questions elicit ideas? And so looking across these 283 adjacency pairs, we found that when closed questions were used, that most frequently elicited those brief terms or facts, which aligns with that idea of the triadic dialogue in that IRE format. But when open questions were used, it's pretty probable that in response to an open question, students are going to start offering extended observations and extended ideas. And so I share this today as kind of another layer of that, providing confidence that, okay, if I plan out these questions, if I use my discussion map and have an open framing question and plan a couple follow-ups, I should be well on my way to eliciting extended observations and extended ideas from my students to form the foundation of a discussion using productive talk. And so I like also to draw on this when people are teaching for the first semester, and of course we all have some nerves around that, and say, okay, plan out your questions, and it's likely that if you plan out these questions, you're going to be eliciting more extended ideas from your students. And then the other thing I'm interested in is that we might plan out the best question ever, but I don't know if other people resonate with this, where you're like, oh, this is such a great question, I can't wait to pose this. And we pose it, and then the first ideas that we kind of get in response to that might still be kind of brief one-word responses. And we might think, oh no, I was really hoping for some extended dialogue. I thought this question was so good. I wonder why it's not doing what I expected it to do. And so I wanted to look deeper into the specific pieces of this. And so when we're looking at kind of the sequence of discussion, we can refer to that first initiating question as the first turn of talk. Then what the students say is the second turn of talk. And then how you respond is the third turn of talk. And so I wanted to look at that first turn and that third turn to understand better what might be happening in those moments. And so what I did was looking across now 26 discussions, where looking at how many ideas were elicited and then correlating that with the open questions that were asked in the first turn. So this first graph here is just showing us in that first turn, if an open question is asked, does that correlate with eliciting ideas? And so with that first turn, there's no significant correlation there. So I might ask a really great question and elicit great extended ideas from that first student response, or I might ask that really great question in the first turn and elicit a really brief one-word term. And so that's where then that follow-up of, can you say more? Can you tell me more about that? What do you mean by that? That really has an impact, because when we look at the same thing for that third turn, now we see a correlation between using open follow-up questions and eliciting more extended ideas. And this is discussed in the literature, but I wanted to see it for myself, what's happening in the classrooms that I was focused on that third turn. And so coming back to our discussion map, I've put some stars here around the third turn because it's really, I think, the most critical point in that discussion map. Just checking my time, because that third turn could either close down discussion with an evaluation of the student's idea, or it could really open up the discussion for extended student contributions. And so that third turn and this relationship between having an open response in that third turn space reflects the important role of instructors' responses to the ideas we elicit in the classroom. And how we respond also kind of helps set classroom norms, because it signals the role that we see ourselves having in that discussion, where how we respond in that third turn could position us as the knower and giver of information, or the way we respond in that third turn could position us and signal to students as we are more the manager of the discussion pace and the direction of that discussion, because we are working towards specific goals. And so this third turn has been described as an extraordinary space. And I find it fascinating what happens in that third turn during discussion. And so I wanted to share that with you all so that we could all attend to what happens in that third turn and notice for ourselves how that can shift the way discussions happen in the classroom. And if you are have a goal for a discussion in a classroom, and at the end of the class feel like, oh, that didn't quite go the way I was hoping it would go, I encourage you to think about, well, what were my responses doing, and do I want to try something a little bit different the next time? And so to give us an example of this, actually, I think I'm going to skip over this and go right to the next challenge, and then we'll come back to what I wanted to do there. And so another challenge is, we might have a discussion and it might be like, great, people were saying lots of things. There's lots of talking. I heard from lots of students, but now let me step back and think, but was that a productive discussion? Was talk being used as a tool for learning? What can I feel? Can I put my finger on what I think students took away from that discussion as learning moments? And so in response to that challenge, I encourage us to think about, what are our purposes for discussion? Because this is something that I had not considered. I thought, oh, we're just going to discuss and it's going to go great. But really, I had to step back and say, well, what is my purpose? Because there's different types of discussions and we are moving towards different purposes. And so I just put 4 up here that are common in science classrooms, but I imagine that people might also resonate with these different 4 types of discussions, where one of my favorites is the elicitation discussion, where our goal is really just to get ideas out into conversation space, uncover prior experiences and knowledge, and provide insight into how our students might be thinking about a phenomenon or topic, kind of at the beginning of a unit of instruction, and then inspire interest in new learning. So that's one goal, but that's different from a discussion that, like a consolidation discussion, where the goal is to relate steps of an investigation to disciplinary concepts. So these are the things we just did, but why did we do that, given what we understand about this topic or phenomena? Those goals are different than the goals for a data discussion, where that discussion might focus on different dimensions of data that were collected during an investigation, identifying pieces of a data set that are most relevant for the investigation. And then that also differs from a goal that you might have in an explanation discussion, where now the goal is to really make claims and provide evidence to support those claims and be able to justify how that evidence supports claims. And so there's the 2 I've used most commonly are the elicitation discussion kind of at the start of the unit, and then an explanation discussion towards the end of the unit or activity, and reminding myself that those have different goals is really key, because I should not be anticipating that students in an elicitation discussion are going to have really fully formed explanations of the phenomena, because we're about to explore it. We haven't explored it yet. So keeping those goals in mind is key, because then also, if we've got different goals, we need to use different tools to get to those goals. And so while I just shared the general discussion map, we can actually dig a bit deeper to think about specific talk moves and how they function as tools to support different discussion goals. And so I'm going to, the next slide shows a talk moves taxonomy that I didn't create, but I find this so useful, and I actually have it printed out and on the bulletin board in my office because I look at it regularly. But thinking about, okay, what function different talk moves have. And I want to share this file with everybody, so you have it. Oops, let's go back. Let's see. There it is. Okay. So let me share that. The file should be able to come through here. And so you can also print this out and put it on your bulletin board in your office if you would like to. There we go. And so thinking about talk moves as tools, we can go deeper than saying just an open initiating question and open follow-up questions, but we can think about the different function of those open initiating questions and follow-up questions. So for example, we might think about our open question as a probing question, and there's different things we can probe: requesting to make observations public, requesting to make ideas public. And often I start with, first, what do you observe? Because that's a little bit more low stakes and easier to take risks, because if I'm observing it, there's no way my observations can be wrong because it's what I observed. So that often is a good way to kind of get into some of these productive talk discussions, because first we're sharing our observations, and then we can share our ideas about those observations. And then along with probing, there's also pressing. So once ideas are shared, we might press to ask for examples. We might request to fill out an explanation. We might press a student to see how the ideas they put forth are or are not consistent with other ideas that have been put forth, or the data we've collected, or the passages we've read. And then there's a few other ways to press. And then there's also follow-ups. So again, I love these because you can use them in almost any situation. So if I'm like, oh, what can I say that will be productive in this moment? Always say more. What makes you think that? Or if a few ideas have been put out, how is your idea different from this one? Are really useful things to have in my back pocket. Then thinking about opening up crosstalk. So we're making sure multiple voices are involved in that conversation. And my favorites too, making sure we're thinking about our wait time. And then revoicing, because again, one of our goals of productive talk is making sure all students can hear and are understanding the ideas that have been put forth. And so revoicing can be used to, again, make sure everybody can hear, but also if I'm unclear how I'm understanding an idea a student put out, I might revoice it and say, so what I hear you saying is this. Is that what you were thinking, or can you correct my understanding? And then focusing is another great one, because often I ask an initiating question that while I thought it was great, I realized afterwards it was maybe too big. And so focusing that initiating question to just kind of one part of a complex representation or task is kind of a useful way to step back when a discussion isn't going as I expected it to. I realized, oh, my question there needed to be focused a bit more. And so those are the talk moves as tools. And so now I only have a few more minutes before I want to leave time for discussion, but I wanted to share an example of a discussion now that we've thought about discussion maps and we thought about talk moves as tools to see what do we recognize in this discussion. And so this is an example of an elicitation discussion. The purpose was to elicit students' ideas. They haven't investigated this particular phenomenon or topic yet, but they're putting ideas on the table. And so Tracy is the teaching assistant in this situation, and we hear from a few students. So I will read it out loud and you can read it along with me. And as we do that, think about what kinds of things is Tracy saying, and how does that seem to be useful in reaching her goals for the discussion? So Tracy starts and says, so what are some explanations that you guys talked about in your groups? John says, climate change. Okay, so how is that going to affect everything? John continues, it affects the migration of certain animals. So like it'll change where the manatees go. Also, they're endangered. So that like on top of that, compounded, it makes it very hard to find manatees. Tracy says, okay, so how would a decrease in manatees affect everything? John says, overgrown plants. Tracy says, okay, and what effect is an increase in plants going to have, do you guys think? Notices a different student has something to say and says, Brian. Brian says, increase in things that eat plants. Okay, so how would an increase in either the plants or the plant predators maybe make the water dark and murky or affect the apple snails? And then Tracy returns back to John. What were you thinking, John? And at this point, John then says, well, some of the fish that eat plants also ate apple snails. So if there's more predators overall, then that would probably make a worse environment for the apple snails. And so I just want to give you 30 seconds to think about what are you noticing here now that we've talked about discussion maps and we've introduced just really briefly some different talk moves. Do you see anything in this elicitation discussion that relates to those ideas we just talked about with the discussion map? And so let me give you a few moments to think on your own, and then I'm hoping a few people might share a couple observations, but not yet. I'll let you know when we're ready for that. All right, does anybody notice anything that they'd want to share and highlight? And feel free to just unmute and share an idea.
I noticed focusing.
How so? What aspects signal to you focusing?
Well, in the third turn question, the teaching assistant was asking the student to dive deeper, elaborate a little bit more, but doing it less in an open-ended way and more in a focused way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, did other people notice similar things or notice something different they wanted to highlight?
The only thing I noticed that there wasn't crosstalk. I think the TA was in asking questions and moving the discussion along, and I didn't see crosstalk. That was just one thing I noticed that wasn't there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those observations. I'm going to limit us to just 2 so I can wrap up what I wanted to share and leave time for discussion. But yes, thank you for both of those things that you noticed, Mark and Liz. I agree. When I look at this, I see that initial opening question. I see kind of a brief initial response, and then Tracy using a follow-up to focus and elicit more of an extended response. And I also agree that Tracy's working to elicit response and ideas from students. And at this point in the discussion, there's no moves to initiate crosstalk between students. But I think this is a good example of, we kind of see the pattern over and over of asking a question and getting kind of a brief response, and then the role of that follow-up to then elicit a more extended response. And there's some little codes that are still in here from the analysis that I didn't really talk about, but when it's a more brief response, those I code as R1, and when it's a more extended response, those are the ones indicated as R2 or R3. So hopefully that gives an example of again, that importance of that third turn for creating opportunities for students to extend their thinking on their ideas. Thanks for participating. Okay, and so we can then take our general discussion map and make it more specific based on our specific goals. And so if the goal is an elicitation discussion, we might take our general discussion map and plug in and sequence more specific talk moves. So instead of just saying a good open initiating question, I might say, I know I want to use a probe, and then I'm going to plan a gentle follow-up, and then I might use revoicing, and then I want to open up crosstalk. And so we can take that initial discussion map I introduce and then make it more specific with the different talk moves that we pull from our repertoire for different goals. And so here's an example that I might use for an elicitation discussion. But of course, I might sequence different things depending on different purposes. And so also on that file I shared are these 3 examples of, well, if my goal is this, here's how I might sequence some talk moves to get at that goal. And so my purpose here is just to highlight that now we can think about these talk moves as tools, and when we sequence them in different ways, that will help us move towards different goals. And so we shouldn't think about relying on the same set of talk moves if we're having different goals for our discussion, because it might not help us meet those goals. Okay, and so in the title of the talk, I think I highlighted that I was going to try to give us some ideas about how to use these tools in both small and large settings. And so I started a few ideas, but I also imagined that this group of people here is going to have some also great ideas for their own context. So I didn't want to try to do an exhaustive list of ideas. And so thinking about productive talk in small classrooms, I often think about if I've got more of a class of 24 students and they imagine they're working in groups of 4, and I might be talking to each of those groups. As I go up to groups, I'm still thinking about my talk moves, but I do have different goals than when I'm in my large classes of 200 students. And so with a specific group, I want to make sure I'm hearing from all members of that group. So if I approach a group and I ask them about the ideas and what they're thinking about or what they're working on, one person might immediately speak up and kind of represent the group's thinking, but then I also want to check in with the other members of the group to see if they agree with what was initially said, if there were other ideas that had come up that they decided not to go with. So I kind of give everyone a chance to participate and work on their thinking and think about how they're understanding where the group is going. So that's my first bullet point of pressing for consensus or alternative ideas from all group members. And then if I have multiple groups working on things, this is something from the 5 practices for orchestrating productive discussion that I'm still working on, but thinking about that maybe not every group is going to be able to share out my whole class conversation. So each time we have a discussion, strategically selecting which groups are going to share out and the order they might share out, so that I'm structuring how the conversation might build towards the core ideas and the goal of my discussion. And of course, keeping in mind which groups share out should encompass all groups across multiple discussions. And then another strategy that just blew my mind when I learned it, because it works so well, is that in small classes, when students are sharing out, as the instructor, where we stand kind of indicates where they're going to be projecting their voice. And so moving yourself around the room so that the person sharing in that moment orients themselves to the class, they're talking to the class, really helps foster that idea that we're all working on ideas together through our talk. And it's not a dialogue between the instructor and a student, and then the instructor and student. So I hope that's a helpful tip if people hadn't thought about that before. And then in large classrooms, one thing that I've learned over time is really, really important is my role in the revoicing to make sure everybody's hearing and following the discussion. I also work hard to set norms that when we are going to discuss things in a large class, the goal is to elicit as many ideas as possible, as opposed to eliciting one most correct idea. So I try to set norms that I want to hear from at least 3 to 5 different groups. Definitely important in a large class to make sure I intentionally structure partner and group talk first before opening up a whole class discussion with 200 people. And then as I'm structuring that partner and group talk, I make sure to go around and listen to what the different groups are saying, check in with them, and also encourage them, like, that's a really interesting way of thinking about this. Would you be willing to share that when we come back together? And so again, giving students a chance to work on and think about the ideas that they're going to share and feel like they've got valid and important contributions that are going to be useful for the whole class to hear about. So those are a couple ideas I came up with. And so I'm just going to, I feel like I talked about quite a few different things. So I wanted to summarize them all and then continue with questions and discussions. So from the things we've thought about this morning, I think some of the main tips and takeaways are that first and foremost, we need to believe in both the possibility and the efficacy of productive talk. So we need to believe that classroom talk shapes opportunities for thinking, reasoning, and learning, and that those productive beginnings are great resources for learning. And then if we believe in that, and if we think that, okay, this is a goal I want to work towards, make sure we identify our purpose for the discussion, take our time in our planning to plan our open framing question and a couple follow-ups, remind ourselves to structure in time to think, listen, and then also really hear our students' ideas. And then that third turn is what's often referred to as an extraordinary space. And so that just makes me so excited to see what happens in my discussions each time, because based on that third turn, it's gonna, who knows where it's gonna go, but I hope it's gonna be productive. So I'm going to then go to the last slide here for questions and discussion. I put a few questions out to foster discussion if people want to share their ideas there, but of course, any questions or anywhere that people want to take this discussion time would be fantastic. So I'm wondering, based on all the experience of folks that are here today, in terms of orchestrating productive talk in your classroom, what challenges have you experienced, and what ideas do you have to address those challenges? And as we talked about different talk moves and sequencing talk moves, did you notice, oh, yeah, that's a thing that I do, and how do you do that? So thank you today. Yeah, Mark.
So great, Anna. I really enjoyed that. So my question is like, what is your setup that goes into the talk? So for example, do you give the students a case, a problem to solve, or something more abstract? So what I've learned in my long career is I was better when I was younger, leading discussions on more abstract ideas. But as I've gotten older, I rely a lot on cases or problems. So what is your setup? Like, are you just lecturing and then you just go into a talk, or is there some kind of setup before a problem, a case, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it also aligns with a lot of in the different tips and guides on how to support productive talk. There's always a section 2 about thinking about the task or the activity that you want that productive talk to go around, because you can plan all you want for productive discussion, but if you're not also thinking about the task or the activity that's going to form the foundation for the discussion, it's likely not going to go the way you're hoping it's going to go. And so I often think about it as where we are in a unit, and if we're at the start of the unit and I'm thinking about the goal being an elicitation discussion, I often try to think about a puzzling event or something puzzling. And again, this can be quick. This can be a discussion that might take 10 minutes at the start of a class, where you might put up a puzzling picture to have students make observations of, or show a video that might bring up questions, and then so some sort of puzzling event, and then elicit ideas around what students observe with that and potential explanations for that. And so that is something that I really like to use to start a unit. And then if we're more into the unit and I'm more wanting to see how students are applying ideas, we might do an activity where I bring in some data and they look at the data and try to make a claim of that data, and relate it to the ideas we're using. So that would be more of an explanation discussion. But yeah, usually making sure there's concrete things that we're either trying to observe and wonder about, or ways to look at a set of data and then draw conclusions around that. Josh. Oh, Mark, sorry, do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you.
Oh, am I up now?
Yes, please.
Hey, Anna, thank you so much for a very illuminating talk. It seems like everything in this case starts with the belief that instructor thinks that this is an important part of their instruction. Mm-hmm. And my question is, how do you convince some of our colleagues who teach very content intense or dense courses where they feel like they're chasing, covering a bunch of chapters like organic chemistry or general chemistry, I'm sure Bio 101, for example, where time's very limited. And yet at the same time, whenever we teach an upper division course, we complain about students lacking that experience of analyzing data more in depth and being able to articulate their point or understanding. So how is there a kind of a good way to convince some of your colleagues about how important it is to bring these kind of exercise to even the most dense courses that you might be teaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't know if my answers are going to be the most useful, but what I tend to come back to, because it kind of follows my own experience as well, is I think the most powerful thing is when we're discontent as an instructor, and when we say, oh, we just got to the exam for this unit, and I really thought my students had this, but then based on what I'm seeing in the exam or whatever the summative assessment for that unit is, it seems like, oh wow, they didn't understand it as deeply as I thought they understood it. And I'd like to think about what to do differently for that. So I think it starts with a discontentment in I thought I was supporting learning in my class, but now I'm questioning that. And even in really content heavy courses, like I teach biology 1, and there's a lot of content in biology 1, giving myself a moment to recognize, okay, I feel like I need to cover all this content, but then after an exam saying, oh, but I see from the exam results here and what students were answering on the exams that they really don't understand this thing that I know is a foundation. And so now I have to make the decision as an instructor, even though I know I have all this to cover, is it going to really be productive to cover it if we haven't really understood the concepts that it all builds on? And so that discontentment right there for me is when I said, well, I might not end up covering the entire thing I'm supposed to cover in Bio 1, but if I take some time to build in some activities where we have productive talk and we're developing our understanding through talk, I know my students are going to better understand this. And so yeah, I think it has to come with that discontentment, because if I'm not discontent with it, then I'm not kind of looking for answers to that discontentment or things I can change that discontentment. But if I am discontent with it, I think that's the moment where I'm open to the idea of, well, I might have to I might have to think about focusing on, fewer high level ideas and really understanding those, and letting some of the things be like, okay, here's we didn't dig into this in class, but also this chapter in your books might be important for the future classes you're taking and things like that. I hope that was a useful tip, Josh. But yeah, I do really think
Thank you.
It starts with a feeling of discontentment.
Yeah.
Dangi.
Hi, Anna. Thank you for your talk today. So my question or comment kind of also goes with Josh's, and we want students to have this critical thinking skill. And so what does that really look like in like a 50-minute class? Do you give them a chance each period? Do you say like 15, I'll give 15 minutes to this and then we'll do course content for the next 35, or do you let it go for as long, or do you do it just a couple of times a week, or
yeah, that's
practice? So yeah,
yeah,
and then they'll get faster at it. But anyway,
right. Well, and I think what you just said there is an important point to highlight, that things can get faster as you're building these norms with whatever class you're in. So I think that's such an important point to highlight, that at the start of a school year, at the start of a semester, it could feel like, oh, I thought this was going to take maybe 15 minutes, but we spent the whole 50 minutes on this discussion. How am I going to, I can't spend that time, but knowing that as a classroom community, as we build the norms and expectations that we are going to be sharing and discussing our thoughts, it will become just more habitual, and things will be faster. And so then what you plan as a 15-minute discussion will likely be a 15-minute discussion. But then in terms of like kind of integrating that into units of instruction, I think it depends on how people organize their units, but in thinking about one unit or kind of arc of an investigation. If we're thinking, okay, we're going to investigate this driving question, and in this driving question, I know I'm going to hit these important content areas and these important standards that I need to hit, but we're going to do that over an arc of multiple lessons in a unit. Then I might say, okay, this beginning class at the unit, we're going to spend a lot of time observing and eliciting ideas. So we might spend a full 50-minute class observing and eliciting ideas. And then for several 50-minute classes after that, we might be doing more in investigating things, introducing content, typical direct instruction through lecturing to fill in some of the content, and then get to another area. Okay, well, now let's do some working with some data and trying to apply that and have another discussion class. And so I think it could really vary depending on the goals. If there's if you're thinking about a week, maybe a topic a week, you might start with an elicitation discussion at the first class of the week, maybe just in the first 10-15 minutes, and then introduce some ideas, and then have another type of discussion where maybe students talk about how their initial ideas relate to what they've learned now, and then maybe introduce some more content, and then apply it to a data set or reading a passage and analyzing something, and then have another discussion around there. That could be. But I should also say, in terms of, I really get excited about these ideas and thinking about how to incorporate them into my teaching. But in terms of in practice, I also struggle with all these challenges that everybody's bringing up, where I'll definitely have multiple classes that are largely direct instruction, and then also be like, okay, but great, I've got, I know I have a good activity where we can structure a productive talk around this as well. And so building those in as well.
Yeah, thank you. That I appreciated that.
Anna, as we're hitting the final moment here, I think this is a good time to wrap up. And I will just say, I'm teaching right now a film studies course, and I am so happy to have some new terms to use to help me think about how I'm structuring the discussion in my classes. I was thinking even last night when I was teaching that there were certain, I guess, certain questions that felt like duds during discussion. And I think some of it was because the placement of them was at the wrong moment. And the list you gave of the different purposes for discussion, the elicitation, consolidation, et cetera, I think that's really useful for me to think about how I'm going to alter some of the organization of that discussion. So I appreciate that very much.
Great. I'm so glad it's useful. And I do agree, the purpose is so important, because often, if the goal is to elicit ideas and I forget that, I'm thinking, oh, some of the ideas that are coming out, really, we're going to need to do a lot of work on those ideas, but being like, but that's okay, because right now my goal is to elicit ideas, and then we'll do some lecturing, we'll do some activities, and we will have time to work on those ideas. So it's okay in this moment. And then the other thing I just wanted to share with everybody is that in thinking about the discussion maps and the talk moves, again, I find them so useful, but I also find a much more heightened awareness where I see myself doing things I know I don't want to do in the moment. So I'll be doing a discussion, I'll say, oh, that was not a good question, Anna, or you did not provide good wait time. And so I just want to kind of preface that to everybody, that as we're thinking about these things, perhaps don't be surprised if there's also a heightened awareness of recognizing when we're doing things that are not working towards our goals. But I think that's super productive too, to be able to recognize that in the moment.
Yeah. So thank you again. This was a lovely talk. I took lots of notes, and I appreciate everybody's time today coming out for this conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.